You don't need anyone to notice you're doing well. In Norway, there's an unofficial social code almost everyone grows up absorbing, and today I'll walk you through 10 things it quietly discourages. Things nearly every American does without a second thought, often without realizing they're doing them at all. Stay until number 6 because it's probably open on your phone right now, and by the end, you'll understand exactly why it's quietly working against the peace you're trying to build. Let's begin. Janteloven, the Law of Jante, isn't an actual law, and no one in Norway could hand you an official copy of it. It's an unwritten social code, first articulated in a 1933 novel but describing something Scandinavian culture had been practicing long before that book existed. The quiet expectation that you shouldn't think you're particularly special, particularly better, or particularly more important than anyone else around you. On the surface, it can sound restrictive, even a little harsh. In practice, it functions as a kind of social lagom, not suppressing genuine achievement, but discouraging the specific performance of achievement for an audience. It's worth being precise about what Janteloven actually objects to, because it's easy to mishear it as discouraging success itself. It doesn't. A Norwegian can build a successful company, earn considerable wealth, or achieve something genuinely rare, and none of that alone triggers the discomfort Janteloven describes. What triggers it is the display, the specific choice to make sure others notice, rank, and are quietly invited to feel lesser by comparison. Achievement, in other words, is fine. Performance of achievement for an audience is where the discomfort begins. Let's look at what that discouragement targets first. Number 1, visible logos and designer branding worn specifically to be recognized. A handbag chosen as much for its instantly identifiable emblem as for its actual craftsmanship, sneakers picked because everyone will clock the brand at a glance. Janteloven treats this instinct with quiet suspicion. If the item's value depends partly on other people noticing it, the purchase was never fully about the item at all. Number 2, humble brag posts dressed up as gratitude or reflection. Can't believe I get to call this beautiful house home, captioned under a photo engineered to showcase exactly that house. Janteloven has little patience for achievement wrapped in false modesty. Either state it plainly or don't state it, but performing humility while broadcasting status is, if anything, viewed as worse than simply bragging outright. Number 3, a home bought larger than genuinely needed, chosen partly for how impressive the size itself reads to others. Extra rooms rarely used, square footage that exists mainly to be mentioned. A Norwegian sensibility tends to ask a quieter question. Does this space serve how I actually live, or does it serve how I want to be perceived by people who visit twice a year? Number 4, replacing a fully functional phone or car simply because a newer model has arrived. Nothing is broken, nothing has failed. The only real change is that a slightly newer version now exists for others to notice you have. Janteloven reads this less as consumerism and more as a specific kind of quiet performance, upgrading not from need but from a desire to remain visibly current, as though falling even slightly behind the newest release might register, to someone, as falling behind more broadly. Number 5, competitive spending on children's activities and gear, driven less by the child's actual interest and more by a parent's discomfort at appearing to fall behind other parents. The most expensive equipment, the most impressive-sounding programs, chosen with one eye on the child and one eye on comparison. A Norwegian approach tends to separate these two motivations cleanly and quietly favors whichever one the child actually asked for, treating the parent's own comparison anxiety as something to manage privately rather than something the child's activities should be enlisted to soothe. Now here's number 6, the one I promised, and it's probably open on your phone right now, whether you're scrolling it or simply picturing exactly what it looks like. Number 6, the curated highlight reel. A social media feed edited, consciously or not, to show only the version of life that reads as impressive, successful, or enviable, while everything ordinary, difficult, or simply unremarkable gets quietly filtered out before it ever reaches the grid. Here's what's worth sitting with. This isn't really about vanity in the way it's often dismissed as. It's a slow, cumulative performance, curated one photo at a time, that eventually requires maintaining an image increasingly disconnected from how the actual day-to-day of your life feels to live inside of. A Norwegian sensibility, shaped by Janteloven, tends to view this kind of curation with real discomfort, not because Norwegians don't take good photos, but because building an entire visible identity around being perceived as exceptional runs directly against the culture's oldest, quietest instinct. You are not particularly more special than the people watching, and performing otherwise, image by image, tends to isolate you from them rather than impress them. There's a specific cost to this that rarely gets named directly, which is the growing gap between the feed and the life. Each curated post widens that gap slightly, and closing it back up, admitting the ordinary Tuesday alongside the extraordinary vacation, starts to feel disproportionately vulnerable the longer the highlight-only version has been maintained. What began as simply sharing good moments slowly calcifies into an obligation to keep appearing exceptional, indefinitely, to an audience that mostly never asked for that particular performance in the first place. Number 7. Job titles and promotions announced primarily for the reaction they're expected to generate, rather than the accomplishment itself. There's a meaningful difference between sharing genuine news with people who care and performing status for an audience assembled specifically to witness it. Janteloven doesn't ask you to hide real accomplishment. It asks whether the announcement is serving connection or serving comparison. There's a useful test buried in this distinction. Genuine news tends to be shared with a handful of people who already know the full context of your effort, while performed status tends to be broadcast widely, to an audience whose reaction matters more than their actual relationship to the achievement itself. Number 8. Dinner and wine choices made to impress rather than to genuinely enjoy. The bottle selected because of what ordering it signals to the table, the restaurant chosen for its name recognition as much as its food. A quieter approach simply asks what you'd actually order if no one else were watching you order it. There's a particular irony worth noticing in this category specifically. Food and wine are among the most immediately, physically personal pleasures available, and yet they're also among the easiest to quietly hijack into performance, the actual taste of the meal becoming almost secondary to how the choice reads to everyone else at the table. Number 9. Vacation destinations, chosen primarily for their bragging rights rather than genuine desire. A trip picked because of how impressively it will read once documented, rather than because it's actually where you most wanted to go. Janteloven suggests a simple, clarifying question. Would you still want to go if you couldn't tell anyone about it afterward? It's worth sitting with how often the answer genuinely surprises people who ask it honestly for the first time, revealing a gap between a trip chosen for its story value and a trip chosen for the actual experience of being there. Number 10, and this is the one that tends to land differently than the rest, gym memberships and expensive equipment acquired to be seen owning them rather than to be genuinely used. The unused home gym, the boutique studio membership, maintained mainly for what it signals rather than how often it's actually attended. Janteloven's quiet resistance here isn't about fitness at all. It's about noticing how many purchases, across every category we've covered, were never really about the thing itself, but about who might be watching you have it. The equipment sits in the corner not because motivation failed, but because the actual goal was never really the workout. It was the version of yourself the equipment implied to anyone who happened to see it. Underneath all 10 of these sits a single, quieter question worth carrying forward, the one Janteloven ultimately asks without ever phrasing it this directly. Who is this choice actually for? Not in a cynical sense, assuming every decision is secretly performative, but as an honest, ongoing audit. Some choices genuinely are just for you, private, unwitnessed, and entirely satisfying regardless of whether anyone else ever learns about them. Others, if you're honest, were quietly built with an audience in mind from the very beginning, even if that audience was never explicitly acknowledged. Neither category makes you a bad person, but only one of them tends to produce the kind of peace that doesn't depend on anyone else's reaction to keep functioning. That's all 10. Here's a simple 2-part test for your own choices going forward. First, the audience test. Would you still make this choice if absolutely no one else would ever know about it? Sit with that question longer than feels comfortable, because the honest answer often arrives a beat or two after the quick, flattering one. Second, the comparison test. Is this decision responding to something you genuinely want, or to a quiet, ongoing measurement against people around you? Choices that pass both tests are simply your own. Choices that fail them are quiet performances, however sincerely they might feel in the moment. It's worth adding a note on what Janteloven isn't, because it's easy to hear all of this and slide into a different kind of performance entirely, the performance of not caring what anyone thinks, which is its own subtle way of still centering the audience. The goal was never to become someone who visibly rejects all status or all enjoyment of nice things. It's simply to notice, honestly, which choices were made for the experience itself and which were made for the reaction they generate, and to let that noticing gently redirect future choices, purchase by purchase, without turning the noticing itself into a new performance to be admired. A calm life was never built by being noticed enough. It was built the way Janteloven intends, quietly trusting that you don't need to be seen as exceptional in order to actually be at peace, and that most of what we perform for an audience was never really serving us in the first place. There's a final distinction worth carrying with you, separate from any single item on this list. Janteloven was never really about smallness for its own sake. It was about proportion, the quiet, ongoing practice of letting your sense of worth rest on something sturdier than whether anyone happened to be watching in the moment it mattered. That kind of worth doesn't need an audience to confirm it, which means it also doesn't disappear the moment the audience looks away. Tell me in the comments which number hit closest to home, and let's hold each other accountable to notice it. If this shifted how you see your own choices even slightly, share it with someone who might need the reminder that being unremarkable to strangers is, quietly, one of the most peaceful things a life can be. Which number are you rethinking today? Meet us in the comments and tell us. I'll see you in the next one.